The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on Europrivacy, introducing what could be your gateway to certified GDPR compliance. My name is Alan Calder. I'm your host for this afternoon. I'm the founder of IT Governance, which is the main company in the GRC International Group. I've been involved in the cybersecurity and privacy world for some 25 years. I've written a number of books on GDPR, on cybersecurity, and of course, IT Governance is a global leader in the world of GDPR and information security, particularly through ISO 27001. We have pushing 200 people in the business. We've been at it for about 20 years. We've served some 12,000 clients across 5 continents. And we recently became an official partner of Europrivacy, and you can read more about that on the Europrivacy website. Today's webinar really is going to be focusing on Europrivacy. You'll notice that you are all on mute, and that's designed to ensure that there's no background noise and so on. But as I go through the webinar, I'm sure you'll find that there are questions you want to ask. Please do use the question function in your GoToWebinar control panel. That's the chunk of functional text and icons that will be sat on your screen. There's a question line in there. You can click on it. You can type questions into that question box. And when we come to the Q&A section, which will be about 40 or 45 minutes from now, I will give the questions. I'll read out whatever questions there are. And then, assuming that I can, I'll answer the question for everybody, so everybody knows both the question and the answer. So that's the format for today. IT Governance as a business is a company which is built around the logic that our expertise in information security, in privacy, deployed in your business should give you peace of mind that enables you to focus on doing what you do best in serving your clients. We've carried out more than 1,300 organizations working with clients to deal with ISO 27001 compliance, 1,600 cybersecurity and privacy projects in one sort or another, more than 7,000 Cyber Essentials certifications, and we've helped some 1,100 companies on their broader governance, risk management, and compliance activity. So we have a huge amount of experience that we can draw on to deliver services to our clients, and that of course form part of the background and content of the webinar today. So what am I going to talk about? And look, first of all, give an introduction to Europrivacy and what its role is in achieving GDPR compliance. We'll look at the benefits and key principles of Europrivacy certification. We'll have a brief look at how you can make GDPR compliance, start your GDPR compliance journey, and then some practical advice and solutions to get you going. So let's start with the origins of the Europrivacy certification. As you all know, GDPR, EU GDPR, what's now known as EU GDPR, has been around since May 2018. It's been in force effective since May 2018, but it first became a law in May 2016, so there was a 2-year transition period. And of course, one of the big questions that existed right the way through the transition period and since is, how do we prove that we are GDPR compliant? We've done everything we think we should do. How do we prove that we're genuinely compliant? And that is an important question, because you have clients asking you that. That's relevant not only to just normal services that you provide, but particularly if you are a data processor, when of course the controller who's providing the data you're processing specifically needs to know whether or not you're GDPR compliant. It's also a useful aspect of dealing with breaches and so on. A supervisory authority will say, and are you GDPR compliant? And of course, the moment you're going to go say, yes, to the best of our ability or the best of our knowledge, but the final arbiter has typically been a judge, and a case being brought, you either win or lose. Europrivacy changes that substantially, so it's a significant step forward for all organizations. It's the first certification mechanism by the European Data Protection Board as a European Data Protection Seal. Article 42 of GDPR defined that seals, certificates, could come into existence that would demonstrate compliance with the GDPR or with particular skills requirements, the case may be. And Europrivacy, therefore, as a certificate, as a certification mechanism, enables organizations to demonstrate their data processing activities comply with GDPR, and by extension, because extensions negotiated with other countries, with other relevant national and international regulations. So you just think about, what does that shift mean? If we can simply have a certificate that says we're compliant, it's a huge simplification of a whole challenges that exist, talking to clients, talking to regulators, talking to stakeholders and partners. Europrivacy was developed through the European Research Horizon program in 2020, co-funded by the European Commission and by Switzerland, approved in October 2022 by the European Data Protection Board, and it's managed by the European Centre for Certification and Privacy, based in Luxembourg. It's recognized in all 27 member states of the European Union. It's a pan-EU certification and is applicable to both data controllers and data processors. It's available only to organizations that are required to appoint a DPO. So at this stage anyway, one of the core requirements before you can get certified is, are you required to have a data protection officer? So that's kind of relevant to everybody. Certification to be achieved, organizations have to meet the core criteria, the Europrivacy GDPR core criteria. They cover various aspects of data processing and protection, and allow organizations to assess compliance in respect of the lawfulness of your data processing, how you deal with processing special data subjects' rights, and your compliance with the requirements around notifying and protecting the rights of data subjects, the responsibilities of data controllers, the responsibilities of data processors to data controllers, the security of processing of data and how you deploy data protection by design, the management of data breaches, deployment of DPIAs where they're required, how your DPO operates, and remembering DPOs have to be in the UK, in the EU, independent of the processing on which they comment, and how data is transferred, personal data is transferred to third countries or to international organizations. So all the core areas of GDPR are covered by Europrivacy certification. And a certificate is valid for 3 years, and the core criteria are complemented by contextual checks and controls around technology and domain-specific obligations, and of course, technical and organizational measures checking controls to ensure that they meet security requirements. So it's a fundamental do you or do you not comply GDPR certification. International Trademark is registered obviously across the EU and a number of other jurisdictions. Its recognition extends beyond EU borders, means it's relevant for organizations in the US or the UK who are providing services into the European Union, are required to have a DPO and to be GDPR compliant. It can apply to the whole of your operations. Certainly it can apply in the context of the personal data you're processing in scope for GDPR compliance. And it demonstrates that the organization has a serious commitment to high data protection standards and compliance with GDPR on a global scale. So you can think of it as an international trademark that generates GDPR compliance, or you can look at it simply as how do we demonstrate to our EU customers that we are GDPR compliant. You think about benefits. Obviously, the first major benefit is demonstrating legal compliance. I just can't stress enough how useful it is to be able to go, no, I don't have to write a letter. I just simply give you my certificate number. We are GDPR compliant. We're also UK GDPR compliant because the extension negotiated with the UK, we can demonstrate we comply with UK GDPR, which is currently only slightly different to EU GDPR or PIPEDA in Canada, as the case may be. So it's a solid demonstration of compliance with EU GDPR and a growing number of other national or jurisdictional data privacy regulations. That should enable you to demonstrate to customers that they can trust you. So the improved trust, the commitment that you're making to data protection should really build trust with customers, partners, with regulatory authorities, with stakeholders, and should therefore give you a competitive advantage. We're still really at the early adopter, very beginning of the early adopter stage in the curve for Europrivacy, and so the first organizations will be able to say, you know, we are so far ahead of our competitors in terms of demonstrating our commitment to protecting personal data. Remembering that personal data protection has become a much bigger issue for particularly consumers over the course of the last 5 or 7 years. Certification reduces the risk of non-compliance fines, reduces the risk of legal issues related to data protection because, you know, that if you have a breach, and, you know, remember, you're going to have breaches whether you're EU privacy certified or not. What the certificate enables you to demonstrate and answer the question of were you GDPR compliant is yes, we are. We have external audit, we have a certificate, we were compliant. So your risk of major exposure when you have to report a breach to a supervised authority is by definition significantly reduced, simply because you can demonstrate beyond a doubt that you are GDPR compliant. So if you like, boiling that down to some of the key principles: lawfulness of data processing, demonstrating as part of your audit, and the certification is carried out by an independent third-party certification audit. So exactly the same logic as for ISO 27001, a certification body like BSI or DNV, one of those who have become an accredited Europrivacy certification body, will do an audit and certify your compliance with the standard. A consultancy body, a partner like IT governance, will provide services that help you become compliant, but we won't do the certification audit. So lawfulness of data processing, it's a legal requirement. So part of the process of preparing for Europrivacy certification, making sure that you're very clear about lawfulness of processing and that your processing is all being carried out in compliance with your legal obligations. Respecting and upholding rights of individuals regarding personal data, the 8 rights of data subjects around, for instance, access, rectification, erasure, and so on, demonstrating that those are all in place, that you have mechanisms that enable people to exercise those rights. You make it easy and straightforward for them to do so, and that you're carrying out, and you can demonstrate that you are clearly delivering on defined data controller responsibilities. You're managing personal data in line with the requirements of the standard, and that will extend to areas in which you're a joint controller with an organization, or there are 2 controllers processing data simultaneously, but being really clear about the delineation of data controller responsibilities and applying them and being accountable for the application of the 6 data protection principles. Processor, making sure that your processing is in compliance with the GDPR, and that means handling data specifically in compliance with the documented requirements of the data controller or controllers for whom you're doing the processing. So the first 4 major key principles of Europrivacy certification. Security of processing and data protection by design and default, equally important. GDPR is, of course, the general data protection regulation, so it is about protecting data, and the breaches that you have to report are breaches because they compromise the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of data in a way which poses a risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. And so demonstrating that you've implemented robust security measures and data protection principles is another key element of your GDPR compliance. We've for a long time said privacy and cybersecurity are different sides of the same coin, and that's exactly what GDPR says, and that's exactly what Europrivacy certification recognizes, and goes beyond just simply saying you need to do data security. It says if you've got an ISO 727, if you have an ISO 27001 certificate, that will serve to demonstrate, without you needing to do a whole bunch more in the certification audit, that you have a compliant data protection regime. So there's a logical step from ISO 27001 certification, which in the scope you would logically include personal data, and that would build into the next step of getting your overall processing of personal data certified as the Europrivacy certification. ISO 27001 is a major building block of that. How you manage data breaches, so incident response, and being able to track, GDPR requires you to track what you do with incident response. So using an incident response tool that audits and keeps information around how you handle incidents is another key building block of Europrivacy compliance. Data protection impact assessments. And remember, doing a DPIA isn't always necessary, but identifying whether or not you needed one is always necessary when there is a significant change in the way in which you process data or the deployment of a significant new piece of personal data processing software. So a DPIA process that may or may not lead to carrying out a DPIA, appointment of a DPO where that is mandated, and managing transfers of personal data in compliance with GDPR, and that particularly applies to third countries like the United States and for the EU, all of the countries who are currently recognized as having adequate data protection regimes, and of course what happens beyond that. And the recent data transfer mechanism that the Europrivacy, that the EDPB has signed off on and the European Council has signed off on, that enables transfer of data between the EU, the UK, Switzerland, and the US legally, is currently a key component of managing international transfers of personal data. Remember, international transfers of personal data can include the transfer of information like cookies data, assuming that you're still using cookies. Can include the transfer of personal data because you're using an email provider who is based in the United States. So all of those components have to be addressed. So key building blocks of Europrivacy certification are things you should be doing anyway. What Europrivacy as a standard does is encourage you to put all of those things together and make sure you're doing them consistently and consistently well. And I'll come back to the logic of doing that on a platform which enables you to link the identification of risks to the protection of personal data, through to how you manage data breaches, to DPIAs, to transfers of personal data, being able to handle all of those in a platform environment, which means that you've got consistency of data processing that an external auditor can review and can see how robustly you handle, is a key way to build a long-term Europrivacy certification. Remember, it's a 3-year certificate. You'll have surveillance visits through the 3-year period, a recertification at the end of the 3-year period, and being able to demonstrate that you can do all of that is part of how you get certification. So key building blocks of Europrivacy certification. Europrivacy as a certificate should align absolutely with your current GDPR compliance activity. That seems pretty logical to me. Europrivacy is a structured approach to how you go about complying with GDPR. So, while you might think of GDPR as starting with Article 1 and working all your way through to the bit just before it tells supervisory authorities and the EDPB how to behave, that's what you've got to do. But what Europrivacy does is, if you like, gives you a really structured way to think about GDPR compliance, what the building blocks are, and how you go about doing that. So it encourages, of course, it's a management system, continuous improvement. Certification encourages continuous improvement in data protection practices. That's not just because GDPR regulations evolve, but because the requirements of GDPR is that you deploy functionality or technology that is state of the art to manage risks to rights and freedoms of data subjects. And that means you've got to continue evolving your management system. You've got to continue learning from incidents. You've got to continue deploying the learnings into making your processes work better so that you don't have a repeat. What regulators, supervisory authorities hate to see is the fact that you have this data breach, and then you have the same data breach, and then you have the same data breach time and time again. You should be learning from them. You know, the UK ICO just in the last 4 or 5 weeks observed that in the last 5 years, the most commonly reported data breach is the misuse of carbon copy in an email, where a list of email addresses that should go into the BCC field in the email get mistakenly plugged into the CC field, which means that everybody else can see who got the email, which could be a breach of GDPR because it might involve, the email might include sensitive information, for instance, which will tell everybody else on the list that everybody else on the list is whatever it is, has a particular illness. So misuse of carbon copy is a common thing. If it happens once, you should be working out how to improve on the activity inside the organization so it doesn't happen again. Regulatory compliance, much simpler. Customer checks, way simpler. It makes your life much easier from a global business point of view when you've got to fill in those increasingly long RFPs, RFIs. Are you GDPR compliant? You should just be able to go, here's my Europrivacy certificate. Yes, we are GDPR compliant. I'm not going to answer the rest of the questions because by definition, we are compliant. So it should be operationally as well as legally and practically a genuine improvement and simplification of your working life. How do you go about tackling Europrivacy? How do you start the journey from your current state of GDPR compliance to Europrivacy certification? And it's logically a strategic approach. You want to align what you currently do in terms of GDPR compliance with the requirements of the Europrivacy standards. So, as I said, Europrivacy provides a strategic approach. So look at the framework, look at the blocks, the building blocks, and look at what you currently do in terms of GDPR to make sure that what you are doing meets the requirements of each of those blocks. Rather than trying to work your way through all of the clauses one by one, you can just simply go block by block. How do we comply with what GDPR requires? You want to integrate Europrivacy principles where they are specific principles into your documentation, into your existing data processing procedures, so that you can demonstrate that your GDPR compliance is within the Europrivacy framework. So the specific building blocks, the principles, all want to be clearly identified in the documentation, in your staff awareness training and so on, so that everybody understands that you're not just GDPR compliant, you are Europrivacy compliant. You have a Europrivacy compliance certificate. And the key steps that you take is, number one, is a gap analysis. Lo and behold, virtually every regulatory or framework compliance project will start with a gap analysis, because of course you're already doing a number of things that you should be doing, and what you want to find out is the gap between what you are doing and what you should be doing. And so a gap analysis, either using a tool or with an external consultant, IT governance or somebody like that who knows their way around the standard, will be able to look at what you currently do, look at the requirements of the standard and tell you what the gap is between as is and to be, and give you a map towards achieving that. So that's the starting point. It enables you then to put together a plan that outlines the steps, the resources, the timelines required to integrate the Europrivacy principles. Some of your GDPR compliance activity, it might have fallen off over the course of the last 4 or 5 years because, you know, life. And that means you can identify the extent to which you're ready to meet the core criteria and be assessed for compliance. One of the key elements of Europrivacy, and this is it's in the standard, is that you are able to demonstrate that you've mapped data flows. And mapping data flows is a requirement because it's how you can demonstrate that you know where your data is going. When you have a data breach, you need to be able to identify what steps you need to take to deal with the data breach. You need to be clear about where data is flowing beyond the European Union or beyond a country which has recognized as adequate data protection regime, because you need to have in place additional protections to ensure the lawfulness of that processing. But it's also an Article 30 requirement that your data flow mapping is clear about what data you are processing, and many organizations don't actually do this very well. So GDPR compliance looks for you to do that. It could be a major area that you've got to focus on early on, and your data flows may have changed since you became GDPR compliant. And so using typically a data flow mapping tool is a way that you can not only map what you're currently doing, but create a robust basis for maintaining and updating that as time goes on, because you change flows as life happens, as you find better ways to do things. So you need to be able to update data flow in a robust environment. So gap analysis, a compliance or an implementation plan, which would start probably with data flow mapping or updating your data flow mapping. How ready are you for a GDPR Europrivacy compliance assessment? Competence and staff awareness, both critical areas. You need to have people who are managing GDPR who are competent to do that. So a GDPR practitioner certification, a Europrivacy awareness, and making sure that your staff training and awareness includes GDPR and any of the specific Europrivacy principles. So you need to build that out, make sure that you can demonstrate that your staff are aware, because simple things like data subject access requests could be passed, as to any member of staff. So training staff to recognize their obligations, to know how to deal with data protection requirements is a key part of GDPR compliance and therefore of Europrivacy certification. So you modify your processes. You might not need to do anything dramatic. It might just be minor changes in documentation or in activity to make sure the key principles, particularly around data security measures, if you don't have ISO 27001, either implementing ISO 27001 as part of your Europrivacy strategy, or working out how you're going to demonstrate that you have in place data protection by design and by default. Have clarity about how you've gone about compliance. Make sure that in your incident management, for instance, you've got a process in place, not simply to manage incidents, but to track how you do manage the incident, because you're going to have to report on that to a supervisory authority if you have an incident, how you've gone about it, how you've met the requirements for determining whether it's a serious breach or not, that you've done what you need to do in the timescales delivered. And finally, you need to carry out penetration testing. So it's deploy state-of-the-art mechanisms to protect data is in GDPR. Europrivacy is explicit. You need to penetration test. You need to do penetration tests on your internet-facing technologies and infrastructure to make sure that they are secure against external attack and penetration. So all of those steps, carry them out. Europrivacy certification is likely, unless you're already well prepared, to be something which takes a number of months to get to. The benefits are worthwhile because of, we said them all at the beginning, because of being able to demonstrate compliance, because of being compliant, because of what it helps you win in the way of competitive advantage, and dispel in the way of risk exposure and cost. But it's a series of steps that you need to take. I mentioned CyberComply. It's a tool which is, from our point of view, almost essential to build GDPR compliance. It combines a GDPR set of modules that do DPIAs, that can handle incident management, that enable you to map compliance to laws and regulations, with an ISO 27001 management system, which can deal with information security. So it's an integrated set of services. There's a huge roadmap of development going on with CyberComply that will bring a whole series of documentation, automation around documents into the system, but it gives you a seamless automation for GDPR compliance, which is really going to be, we think, increasingly basic to making Europrivacy certification really work. You want to be able to automate risk assessments, you want to be able to automate the reviews and updates of risk assessments and ISO compliance documentation. Your typical compliance team, 1 or 2 people having to manage GDPR cybersecurity compliance with more and more certifications and regulations coming along, it just gets to be impossible to do on a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are simply not robust, and they're very dependent on the individual. So as long as the individual never leaves or goes sick, you probably might be okay. You need a platform that never goes on leave or is sick. You need cost-effective maintenance. You need complete integration. You need updates for GDPR regulations being fed through, and you need to be able to navigate the complexities of GDPR compliance with some kind of ease. You need a dashboard that tells you what's going on. All of those things you can get with CyberComply. So do go and have a look at CyberComply. You can link through, you can arrange to be given a demonstration of the platform. It's obviously something you can access and use on an ongoing basis, but do have a look at CyberComply. It will make Europrivacy and GDPR certification massively simpler and more robust. Apart from CyberComply, there are a number of obvious ways that you can address getting up to scratch for Europrivacy. Apart from a gap analysis, just talk to us, email us. Following this webinar, we can arrange to talk to you about a consultant who can come and do a gap analysis for you and put together an implementation plan, but more particularly implementation consultancy, the how do we do it, what do you need to do. We not only are a Europrivacy partner, but we have a number of our consultants who have been signed off by the Europrivacy team as competent to deliver Europrivacy compliance. We can do penetration tests. We've got an in-house penetration testing team that can deliver a Europrivacy-related penetration test to meet their standards. We, of course, can do audits, we can do GDPR practitioner training, the whole panoply of everything that you need to get yourself GDPR and Europrivacy compliant, we can help with. So do either when you get the slides after the webinar, and we will be circulating the slides to everybody within a day or so, you can click through, or do simply just email us afterwards or call us afterwards and say you'd like to speak to somebody about how you can be helped tackle Europrivacy, be the first in your sector or region to become Europrivacy compliant. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of what I had planned to cover in this really meant to be an introductory session on Europrivacy. We have a number of other webinars planned to go into more detail about particular aspects of Europrivacy compliance so that we can help those organizations who are addressing it on their own do that. Just simply to keep you clear about how things are moving ahead. You can obviously find out more about Europrivacy, GDPR compliance, or anything else by going onto one of our websites, UK, EU, or United States. Lots of ways you can contact us. And that brings us through to Q&A. So let me just turn to that. If you do have questions, just repeating what I said earlier, in your GoToWebinar dashboard, there is a Q&A function, and you can simply go into that and you can type into it any questions which you have. What I will do is I will go through the questions, I will answer them, I'll read the question out, I'll answer the question, and hopefully that will give you the answer that you're looking for. So what's the difference between BCR and certification? If a company has BCR, is certification recommended as well? Well, if you have binding corporate rules, BCR is binding corporate rules. Those are recognized by the supervisory authority. You've designed them specifically to meet the requirements of your own organization, and they demonstrate to the supervisory authority that you have a mechanism for managing your GDPR compliance. But binding corporate rules is not necessarily the same as being able to demonstrate to stakeholders, customers, that you are GDPR compliant. Europrivacy certificate should be on the basis of having BCRs in place, assuming your BCRs are comprehensive, should be relatively easy to get. But Europrivacy certification, in our view anyway, gives you a big step forward because it is an external validation, an external demonstration by a third-party certification body that you are GDPR compliant, that your binding corporate rules are GDPR compliant, that you've done everything required. It's a stakeholder customer demonstration. So while you've obviously got to validate it for yourself, that would be our view of Europrivacy compliance. I would bolt it on the top of binding corporate rules. If a DPO is not required for a company, can the company perform a self-certification that demonstrates compliance? Well, there's nothing ever stopping an organization doing a self-certification, but Europrivacy at the moment doesn't provide a framework by which your self-certification can be recognized. We hope that that will happen fairly quickly, that there are a number of organizations who require DPO, and their data processing obligations are likely therefore to be more significant than organizations that don't require a DPO, which is for us logically why the initial stages anyway of certification focus on DPO. Yes, you know, as with ISO 27001, you can say that you are compliant with Europrivacy. It's worthwhile doing. There are benefits at the point when hopefully the Europrivacy mark gets extended to all other organizations. It would be very easy then for you to make the step on from where you are to formal certification. What's the difference between BCR and certification of the company? I think I just answered that. Yes. Would this replace the need for a company to put in place SCCs and BCRs? Well, not necessarily, because international data transfers is one of the areas that Europrivacy certification looks at. So if you think about the issue of SCCs or BCRs from the point of view of a third party, say a data subject, looking at your organization, not clear whether you process data, where you process data. You are supposed to be clear that data is processed outside the European Union or the UK, as the case may be, and the basis on which that's lawful. And if it's being processed in a country that for which there is not an adequacy finding, there has to be in place either for an international organization, BCR, binding corporate rules, or standard contract clauses. Standard contract clauses are exactly that. They come from the EDPB or the supervisory authority, and they're standard clauses that you have to adopt and comply with. The data subject doesn't know whether you've got those or not. It's not a badge you can put on your website or on your letterhead saying, you know, we have standard contract clauses. It doesn't mean very much to a data subject or to a key customer of yours. A Europrivacy certificate does, in exactly the same way as an ISO 27001 certificate is something you can put on your website, you can put on your letterhead, you can put on your business cards. It's an externally third-party validated certificate of compliance covering a broad range of issues that simply having SCCs don't. So SCCs and or BCR, well, not and or, SCCs or BCR, those are, if they're legally necessary, they're legally necessary. Europrivacy certification is something which sits on top of that and tells the outside world that you've done those things absolutely correctly. Does IT governance cover training for implementer or auditor for the certification? At the moment, we cover training for GDPR practitioner and for lead audits. We are trying to arrange to become a recognized trainer for practitioner, for implementer and auditor for Europrivacy, because it's a logical extension to the range of areas that we already offer training in, and we hope to have good news on that front relatively soon. Thanks for the session. How important would you say it is for an organization that's already ISO 27000 certified to go for Europrivacy certification as well? And that depends on how important personal data processing is to your organization. I would hope that in your ISO 27001 certification, you've already got personal data in the scope for the standard, and you've therefore already got GDPR recognized as being under clause 4.1, the way in which you go about recognizing the requirements of interested parties around security of data processing. If you've already done that, if personal data processing is already in there, well, Europrivacy is a step beyond ISO 27001. ISO 27001 focuses primarily on the security of the processing. Europrivacy says, okay, you're doing that. Are you also doing it lawfully? Are you also doing the processing completely in line with the requirements of GDPR? So if you've got ISO 27001 and you want to convince customers, either corporate or directly corporate and indirectly individuals or directly personal data subjects, then Europrivacy is the step on beyond it. If you think of ISO 27701, which is a personal information management, be part of the scope of your 27001 certification. If you've got 27701 in your ISO 27001 certificate, then I'd almost certainly say do PIMS. I do Europrivacy, because it should be a cinch. It should be very easy to get to. But Europrivacy benefits focus beyond ISO 27001 on telling data subjects that you are processing data both securely and lawfully. You pay the necessary and required attention to the rights of data subjects. Is this something to look at if our organization is purely UK based? So the answer is that Europrivacy already has secured a extension to cover UK GDPR. If you want to be able to demonstrate that you are UK GDPR compliant, Europrivacy is a certification that enables you to do that. It's the same set of requirements. UK GDPR at the moment is not fundamentally different from EU GDPR. The differences are in scope of data processing, in definition of international borders and so on, but otherwise it's essentially the same law. So Europrivacy, because it has an extension to cover the UK, is a very sensible thing for a UK organization to do that wants to be able to demonstrate to its customers that it's GDPR compliant. Would using Gmail and AWS constitute data transfer if no data is accessed in the USA? You have mentioned using emails earlier. We treat data flowing via US servers. You can't treat data flowing via US servers as data in transit, I'm afraid, because the GDPR specifically says that data that is processed outside of the EU can only be done so lawfully if it's being processed in a country for which there is a finding from the European Commission, or for which there is, for which you have standard contract clauses in place, or which, if you're an international organization, you have binding corporate rules in place. All of those having done a risk assessment to ensure that the processing of data in the third country is going to be done at a level of security similar to what you'd get in the European Union. And up until very recently, with the failure of the EU-US Privacy Shield, that did not include the US. And processing data with AWS or Gmail, with any processor that is processing data in the US, there's no such thing as in transit. In transit is processing. It falls with the definition of processing, would have been illegal. Recently agreed data protection framework between the EU and the US legal. It's worth doing, it's worth getting on top of as quickly as you can. The EDPB has recognized it, the European Commission has recognized it, NOYB and Max Schrems has promised to tackle it. The European Court of Justice, on account of the US still enables the states to access personal data in a way that isn't allowed in the European Union, but for the time being it's legal. It might be legal for several years. So you can do it, but you need to be very clear that that's the legal basis on which you're processing data in the US. I hope that's not too worrying answer for you at the moment. How does this fit with ISO 27701? I hope I already answered that, but I'll just cover it again. ISO 27701 is an ISO standard for a personal information management system. You can be certified against it only if it is within the scope of your existing ISO 27001 certificate. So you'll get a 27001 compliance certificate that includes the statement that you have ISO 27701 in place and you've been audited for compliance with that standard. It's a personal information management system. It will cover pretty much everything that Europrivacy covers. It's designed to be a generic personal information management system. But again, if you're thinking about how do I convince stakeholders, how do I convince customers, particularly personal individuals that I'm dealing with, that we are GDPR compliant, Europrivacy is the step beyond that. It should be very easy for you to get a Europrivacy certificate on the basis of a 27001, 27701 combined certificate, because you should be, if anything, pretty well there. There might need to be a little bit more very specific work done around making sure that your lawfulness of data processing, that the way in which you meet the requirements around human rights, the way in which you deal with data processes, all very specifically GDPR compliant, but you should be pretty well there. Do keep the questions coming. Is this something, how does this fit with ISO 27701 I dealt with? Is the certification only for GDPR for international organizations in respect to several data laws? How will it help when having to justify compliance with other laws? So the answer is you need to find, the certification is Europrivacy certification. The Europrivacy body recognizes that organizations increasingly have to comply with more than one set of regulations. So they are negotiating with other countries for recognition certificates, so that the Europrivacy certificate can be extended to cover compliance with those countries. And that includes right now, for instance, the UK, I believe it includes Canada's PIPEDA. So you just want to check with us or with the Europrivacy team. They'll be able to tell you which other countries are currently covered by the Europrivacy certificate. But the single Europrivacy certificate, as long as you're clear about what you want to have in scope, you should be able to extend to cover a growing number of countries. So it should become over time the single most straightforward way of demonstrating compliance with all of the things with which you have to comply. And even if Europrivacy doesn't today enable you to demonstrate compliance with everything you have to do, I would still do it if you have to have, say, EU GDPR compliance, because it gives you the framework that you can then simply continue extending from a certification point of view as other countries come within the ambit of the EP certificate. Finally, how does ISO 27001 2022 change comparing to ISO 27001 2013? And the good news for you in answer to that question is that we've done a whole series of webinars on exactly that, on the differences between ISO 27001 2013 and ISO 27001 2022, on how to go about making the transition. You can access all of those. They are on our website. If you can't easily spot them, please do email us and we'll send you a link directly that enables you to go and have a look at those webinars on the transition. And ladies and gentlemen, that kind of looks as though we're getting to the end of questions on this. What is the application process and how is costing assessed? A good question. There are two steps. One is you need to make sure that you're ready for certification. So you do that by talking to us. You email us, we'll talk to you, we'll give you a scope, we'll work out what it is you need to do, we'll give you a price. For certification, you go to a Europrivacy accredited certification body. You go onto the Europrivacy website and you'll be able to see which certification bodies are accredited to do certifications. And the process of getting a price of doing that is exactly the same as getting a price for an ISO 27001 certification. You talk about scope, you get a price, you get a competing price, but it's exactly as you get an ISO 27001 or 9001 certificate. Is the scheme accredited? If the website says it's aligned, then it's aligned. It's not accredited, I think is the answer to that question. And ladies and gentlemen, I think my voice is going to pack up on us. So I would like to thank you all for having been on this webinar today. If it's been useful, data, as I said, we'll be sending the information out to everybody, so you'll be able to access it separately. But there will be another series of webinars. As I said, please do come on, enjoy those. find them useful, and if we can help you on your Europrivacy journey, please take full advantage of our services in the EU, the UK, and the US to help you do that. Thank you all. I hope you have a safe, secure, and compliant rest of September. Bye-bye.